Welcome everyone to the long-awaited VFX breakdown for the Amber project. We have Mark, the talented VFX artist that did everything on this, and Sebastian, our director.
This is a real honor to have worked on this project with Sebastian and with you too, Matt. I have a background in VFX. I've been doing VFX for like 8 or 9 years. I'm going to do some breakdowns of the shots that we did. This was a fun project. There's a lot going on here, and I had to get a bit scrappy here. Yeah, so let's start with the fish. I feel like that's probably the biggest one. So we bought this fish model and you can just buy it from, I think we got it from CG Trader or something. It was already textured and everything. It already even came with the animation. So basically what I did is brought it into Cinema 4D. If only if it was as easy as just hitting a button in it and it looks good. But here's all the behind the scenes about like the texture that goes in and it feeds into the material. The material is what makes it look like this, makes it look realistic. We got lucky with it having the animation on there already. I'll just show you the behind the scenes of one of the animation. All I did really is like I kept the base animation and then I just moved it through space. I used a ton of different things here. You can kind of see what it's doing.
What was the most challenging part with the fish?
Actually, the fish was pretty straightforward. The most challenging was the animation, trying to get it looking realistic. Just the movement of it, how it was moving through the environment. Background plate here. I'll show you in the After Effects here. Just trying to make this work was a challenge. Here was one of our early tests. See, this is just moving it through space. And then we slowly moved into changing up where it landed and the timing of it. And this was quite a long process actually, because it had to fit not only in the shot, it had to look good, it had to also look good within the context of the cut too. Like I think this is when we had the timing locked. So I'm just doing start to end as the main beats look like, and then this is when the final animation hit at the ending point where we actually got the
Right.
beats looking good, and then I added the more detail where like the fish's body is tilting as it's moving through water. And believe it or not, I'm not actually doing a whole lot of animation on the fish. This is basically its default animation that we got from the model, but then moving it through space made it kind of faked it a little bit.
Was it outside of the glass, like technically?
Oh, that's an
So
interesting point. Like the fish is outside the glass in the...
pretty deep world.
So this cube is the full like the actual size of the fish tank. But I want to show you guys this process where how I would get the shot into cinema.
This makes me feel so bad for all the notes.
You have no idea, Sebastian.
You asked for 360-degree photos.
So why did you need those?
I needed them to learn where you guys place the lights in the scene. So I have a few Insta360 images that you guys took. And so this is for the plant shots, specifically the very last shot in the sequence. And it's used for this scene with all the plants here. What this helped me understand is where you had the light placed, but this helps me to understand where to place the lights in the scene in the 3D space. So it's easy for me to see on the actual shot the in-scene lighting, but then I wasn't sure how you guys place the key lights. So this is a little preview of the set.
Wow.
With the lighting placements in the software. I used this 360 image in Cinema to actually light the scene itself. What this does is that it gets the ambient lighting for the scene straight out of the render. It's really bright, so then I have to go in, match it to the shot. Bring it a bit closer, you can see what the difference is from the render to the composite. The motion tracking was the hardest, I think. The problem I was dealing with is that when I would motion track it, what you actually have to do is you have to undistort the plate because the lens introduces distortion to the shot. With this shot specifically, I didn't have to because you didn't really notice it. It's one of those things like if you don't notice it, you don't really have to do it. I motion tracked the scene and then you can actually export this camera data into Cinema 4D. These planes are actually straight from After Effects, and this is the camera movement from After Effects, and these are the planes that I took from After Effects and just scaled them up for the scene. And then here's the fun part too. So you have to project the plate onto the 3D, so you could see if the animation is working. You could actually get the live feed in the software, but it's also really helpful for lighting and casting shadows. So this is how I made sure that the animation was working properly. And when it comes to compositing it in here, and there's actually shadow information baked into the 3D render. Now when we put it into the scene, the shadows are actually brought in as well. So then if I want to make them darker, or lighter. Like the major thing that I want to talk about with like integrating this is that the colors have to be correct in the way that colors have to be in the same range of the plate. Looking at the darkest area of the plate, it's like somewhere up here, and if I were to make a solid, give me a value of around 7%. So it's not actually completely black. And same for like the hottest value of the plate, range of like 82%. So it's not even pure white either. The plant, these were at 67%. So this is almost as bright as the light, which doesn't make much sense. So now adding the curves adjustment, just a simple gamma adjustment, it brought down the values of the plants down to specific range. But what I like to do is actually to remove all the color. Color can be misleading. A saturated color can look brighter than it actually is. And so you can actually see that the flower here is still just as bright as the lamp. So then again, we went and added exposure adjustment to bring that down, hue and saturation, which you can kind of see, but this is kind of just bringing it into the same color range because you have to match the lightness and the saturation value. If the blacks were too dark, then that would be not a lot of information, but it would also be darker than the plate, which would stand out. These vine shots were an interesting challenge to undertake. I did follow some tutorials on how to make these, like the vine growth, and then I hacked like a bunch of different techniques together. I used Houdini for this. The way that this is being built is that I took the walls from the shot, and then I actually drew curves on the walls in relation to where the vines will be growing. Piping through all of this, it goes through a series of operations to create the actual 3D curves. On the curves, I scattered points. So all the way down here is this tiny little leaf scaling and rolling up, and there's only one leaf that I animated. I don't want to get too deep in the technical, so this is what it looks like when all the leaves are scattered on the points. They all animate at the same time. Then there's some code here which you can kind of see. Over time, the start time changes. The leaves are added together here, and then it's exported out to Cinema. So all the plants and all the vines are rendered in one. The other shot, the close-up shot, this one done in the same way. They're all done in the same way. This scene was built in Cinema. I projected the plate onto the 3D, so as I'm clicking, you can actually see that I'm clicking on the frames. And this was, I could get accurate shadows and accurate placement for the plants. Brought that in the Houdini, and then did the same process, just basically drew the curves on the 3D. There's all this data going on in the back. If I were to just copy the leaf, it would be scaling all at the same time. So that was a problem I had to figure out. A few tutorials that I was like putting together, and it took me a while, but I got there. What it's doing is changing the start time of the animation depending on the point. It changes over time. So this is a little bit of code that's doing that. The leaves aren't animating at the same time, they're animating with a different start time. That's the workflow for the whole Vine setup. It was actually really hard to get this kind of look. I'm lucky to have found a tutorial. This one was brought it into Photoshop and painted this grandma's eyes. So I remember using the pen tool, and then all it really did, it looks like, is just turn the opacity on and off. Then you could see that little shift. That's the pen tool movement. You can see me moving her face just to give a little bit more movement to her head.
So many layers on like one shot. So you have the grandma blinking as its own separate comp, but then behind it you have the flowers with all of the lighting and like texture added to it as well, with the animation of it actually popping up.
Even considering the 3D behind the base, stuff like this has to be considered. There's a single layer for the base. So you can turn that on and off. Even look at this reflection on the table. You can see it actually reflecting off the table.
We had the vape changing colors and the fish in the same shot. The initial approach to that thought process of doing that was going to be quite simple, but then it ended up being a little bit more complex when you got into the weeds.
See the color change here? And it also has to change in the reflection. This one was easy because it was a static shot. A bit crazy because it was the introduction. It was this one. These are the different color changes. I had to mask it frame by frame pretty much. Just because like when this is the focal point, any little adjustment really stands out. And then I had to roto this thing too. If I were to just turn off the masks. Lens distortion too, it like stretches out the edge too, so it's not like I can just translate the mask. So this was a like really unforeseen thing. I thought I could just sample the green and use that as the mask. I could not get that to work. So much in the VFX world, like they just don't give a fuck about the VFX artists, and then the artists are spending stupid amounts of time. This was probably the best VFX project that I've worked on. Happy to share it with you and show you a little bit about my thought process and what I was struggling with, what I learned, and grateful to be able to share this with you.